Okay, what you're seeing is the the color sounds. It is Splendor of Color, HD Colors, Splendor of Colors, the Kaleidoscope. It is a 3D fractal animation, um, and that is the projector, like covering virtually the entire back side of like the tent that you're looking at right there, along with some like a um, three other four other different, three other types of laser beam. One is like the 3D animation, like the ribbon banner type of shapes, as far as like transparency and different types of sequencing of multiple colors of like different types of lasers and all that. But anyway, yeah, that's what you're seeing right there. Um, I'm going to have to maybe adjust the light. I'm going to turn the light off real quick and just take a quick look here to see, to give it a little bit, if that's going to be maybe enough lighting for what I want to do. But that's probably a better view without that one particular light. And I might leave it off for a while. But that is the way it looks inside of my tent here. And this is the cathedral room of what you see me like on my drums. Normally with like not a tent in here. A lot of things going on that seem to be really an issue between, Columbia Pictures and like the Statue of Liberty, and the difference between high school and like colleges and kind of like a mediation between a combine of American Legion baseball and some idea of like, something about during high school of like what would be normally identified as American Legion, not really high school, but of high school age group. And I think that the max age, I think, for American Legion was like 21 years of age. I was 17 years of age as a senior in high school, but I think the age group was like predominantly, majority automatically. It was almost guaranteed, like, the minimum of like being on the varsity baseball team in high school to actually, be considered for like American Legion anyway, because I think the age group, I think if my memory serves me correctly, it's like 21 years of age at a max. And that seemed to maybe have a little bit of significance that yeah, I'm going to kind of think about. And I didn't actually play American Legion baseball. I chose kind of like not to, and I kind of maybe kind of think maybe that may have been maybe a good deal. And just, there's like other issues going on at the time. It's kind of like now I think my memory serves me correctly, is the max age of like 21 years of age, and it kind of almost now with like the initials of American Legion being A and L, or the exact opposite, LA, like Los Angeles or Linguistic Alphanumerics, and it's like predominantly, my direction normally when I'm not like, practicing my drums or, making music videos. Normally I would be, into my original music, and it's kind of getting frustrating, feeling like there's like an issue in between, Pearland, Texas as Brazoria presenting some idea of alphanumerics, and one idea of like a method of banking as District of Columbia being like a Colombian, one person in Brazoria being like, the alphanumerics of 90 and a Colombian. And it's almost like Columbia Pictures is presenting, some idea of like high school as some somewhere that's presenting almost like an issue, separate from, in my mind, is the bicentennial quarter. And the thing about the degree of major universities involving the Statue of Liberty. The thing is that I never really looked at it quite like as like an intellectual easement, as like, impersonating, or, the practice makes perfect. I never really looked at Columbia Pictures like that until like just now, as I'm talking, thinking about, something about the Swiss Klondike bar and the hockey puck, presenting like the HTTP colon. And you've probably heard it before, and it's not that I'm referring to, Columbia as imitations or impersonating. I mean, I did, but that's not really my intent to suggests, but it's just, really kind of like considered to be like not necessarily the grade. But I didn't think that there would maybe even be potentially an issue of a carbon footprint or absentee voting, or non-negotiable, non-transferable itemization, even as graffiti and confetti, or the idea of a birth certificate, or maybe a preliminary prejudice of product registration, of a birth certificate, or product registration itself, and the idea of certain factors that seem to be like in combination, factors of like intellectual property on an international level. But it's just, it's kind of like I have been thinking about the thing about the Columbia pictures giving the impression of the Statue of Liberty, but the thing with this is about the Statue of Liberty is that it's automatically like Paris, France, and like the euro dollar. And the thing with this is that I didn't consider that maybe the thought of having fair use is maybe some idea of high school not being the idea of human capital or beyond a method of banking. And I'm just now really kind of thinking about it, or the thought of like a method of banking as holding, as some idea as purgatory as compared to a boycott and embargo, or the national deficit. And I'm kind of thinking that, right now, okay, I'm going to turn the light back on here real quick, okay? And the thing with this is that, okay, here's things that, I have a little spot right here in between. It's almost, I'm not sure if that's actually a laser or not, to be honest with you, but it seemed to me that ridiculously is, this area seemed to be, it's almost like reflecting information like when I was playing baseball, going all the way back to, a picture at Pizza Hut, full of like Coke or whatever, the thing about the baseball back then, the pitcher's a pitcher kind of like thing. It's kind of like seemingly the whole entire issue of, some idea of like maybe it's the, it hadn't been proven to be, considered an achieved agreed level of like human capital, or the experience of a circuit that removes, any doubt about, some factors that would be presented as maybe the degree going through the circuit, and going beyond what would be considered a circuit of a Stargate program. I think this is that I really wasn't really thinking of that as maybe, just me practicing my drums in my home as some idea, as a method of banking or a method of holding, just practicing my drums as some idea as an easement, or a factor of whether or not if the method of banking was only identified, maybe not identifying human capital beyond the idea of monetary domestic as a neighborhood. And it really seemed to me, really that, or, maybe just the flat plane surface of a signature, an endorsement. It's kind of like in blueprints, the 3D isometrics really presents, the actual participation that even a signature really does. It seemed to be that really through neglect based upon lack of experience, a person like having an entire employment history, endorsing their own checks, or, not being led to believe or even suggested that maybe, the idea of maybe in combination with like managing a personal account as a 1099, not that it's a breach or a claim of ownership, or, the idea of like having fair use, as intellectual easement as a 1099, although a business owner is led to believe to be a sole proprietor, but it's not ever really discussed that an endorsement of an entire employment history would be suggested as a sole proprietorship. That's like a defector seeking amnesty based upon it not being the idea of what would be similar to product registration as a 1099 or a claim on a personal account that had been earned based upon being a check as an employee that had been endorsed on the backside of an employee. And it's kind of like a conflict of interest, and the way maybe really is, and considered, the idea of maybe of a registered charity not having a 1099 on a personal account, and it's still led to believe that it's a business account, and that it's not supposed to be used on a personal account. But is that really only just being led to believe? And anyone can believe whatever they want to believe. It's not that it has to be that way, or the degree, or conflicting information that would only suggest that, using someone that it's not a crime to be an idiot, It's not a crime to be non-negotiable, non-transferable itemization as a non-degreed person, thinking that being within job description is just good faith just because maybe, you've been led to believe based upon, within description that maybe, on the job performance maybe doesn't require maybe the brains of like, international financial management. Or, the claim that a tax ID would only be suggested as, the owner of a business. Although a 1099 doesn't necessarily claim that a sole proprietor is limited as maybe the idea of a silent partnership as a national deficit, having the right to assemble, as not really a defector seeking amnesty. More so, maybe that might give the impression of a defaulted student loan, not registering, and I don't think the word's registering, but putting an account, a personal account, as a 1099, managing, the idea of a person's own endorsement from an employer endorsing their own earned, employment check into a personal account, managing their own stuff as, just one person. And it's not really normally the thought of maybe, a registered charity based on neglect, based on lack of experience, or the thought of maybe, a defector seeking amnesty in the form of like, maybe it's an entrance exam for, the Stargate program of Abraham Lincoln Night Vision Shuttle Government Stargate program, or, thought of like the national deficit of having closed captioning through the hearing impaired, based upon maybe not human capital being identified like using YouTube, .com, or, having a channel or anything that would represent maybe something maybe a little bit more as participation and not a question, in a way. But it seemed to be that whether or not if a preliminary prejudice product registration of a birth certificate is only the idea of maybe neglect based on lack of experience, or the thought of maybe having the right to assemble based upon a practical application that would even represent a defaulted student loan. I mean, ultimately, like, the baptismal rite, a baptism that's considered some idea of not that it's a right to assemble, but that's exactly what it is. As a pool, identifies as collection is the terminology, at least at a minimum of like Washington, D.C., presenting the D.C. as District of Columbia. Ultimately, the idea of some idea as high schools, some idea maybe closer to the limit of not anything other than maybe it's just not the degree, and maybe anything more than that might represent maybe an associate's degree that maybe at a maximum would be the American Bar Association of, a bunch of associate's degree, and be an idea of the state of grace, based upon, maybe an associate's degree, maybe serving, donuts, coffee in an international law firm, in need of a higher education. It's kind of like, well, you have higher education, you're like on the 24th floor in a high rise, you're getting a higher education, you're on the 24th floor of an international, law firm, who are you trying to get, and still an associate's degree, and being accused of like getting a higher education in a high rise because you're like on the 24th floor in an international, law firm. Okay, you have the right to have fair use of yourself, and really not even claim that you're even participating based upon, being the idea of the state of grace is an associate's degree. Okay. Yeah. So like anyway, okay. So like anyway, it's kind of like it's almost like the national deficit in a way. In that way, it's kind of like being led to believe is almost like not being led at all. As far as information goes. But it's kind of like once again, and the reason. See, here's the thing about my life right here, okay, and the idea of like a bicentennial drummer. And the bicentennial quarter from like 1776 to 1976, representing some idea between like more so like Richard Nixon being the Alpha 76, okay. But all the information that it had led through like the idea of like certain information is going repeatedly to the secrets of the temple, how the Federals overruns the country. But I've been thinking about the national deficit and the idea, principle of like telepathic brainwaves. It's like the subconsciousness, but it's like a telepathic power. The alphanumeric 177 minus 26, or mental telepathy. The minus God. It's all it discovers. Like, you mean there's not supposed to be a minus sign in alphanumeric equations? I mean, would that present maybe the thought of maybe an intellectual easement as lifespan? Don't tell me that it's not appreciation in the commercial venue of living quarters, because someone's been in a pawn shop and just doesn't recognize the 240% interest. It's the 240 volts, identifying like a commercial venue of living quarters with a minimum. Normally, I'm assuming it would be the appliances that is like a demanded minimum. And I'm thinking it might be only limited to appliances. How true that is about a commercial venue of living quarters, but it is the 240% in a pawn shop. That is the 240 volts of a commercial venue of living quarter. That's not a neighborhood, and a whole different way of life that really presents the idea of like millionaires in a commercial venue that's considered not a neighborhood or affected by television programming or a neighborhood itself, or deed restrictions in the way of like the idea of maybe television programming, or deed restriction in the way of like carbon footprint or absentee voting or a mechanics lien or any idea, or just maybe turn the K television on, even W television. It seemed to be ultimately the PG-13 of the 23, and it's kind of like I mentioned the 23, the Sigma Alpha Delta Kappa Phi, which is like the 4-letter acronyms. There's like 5 letters in each of the 4 acronyms, sets of 5 of 4 acronyms, and then the 3 of PHI, the Alpha Delta Kappa Phi. 23 letters, okay? It's considered to be some of the highest level. The thing with this is that all this information here recently, and, I was kind of like thinking about the national deficit and the silence, and it seemed to be really potentially, the idea of the Statue of Liberty being silent about something, about some idea that seemed to be maybe potentially a transition, just like really, in my mind, like the right here, right now thing. And the difference of high school as compared to a major university, and the difference between Columbia Pictures and like Brazoria and Pearland, Texas, representing like the entire world of alphanumerics here in Pearland, and just the the alphanumerics of 41 applied to 140, and predominantly of like electronic power in Houston, Texas, and WadeASVPriddy International, the thing about Pearland, Texas, and just the acronym USA, United States of America, being the alphanumerics of 41 applied to 140, like Pearland, Texas. Attenuation is the big thing about electronics, as well as alphanumerics and attenuation, and something about digital signal processing involving the Alpha Delta Kappa Phi, Sigma Alpha Delta Kappa Phi. And it's kind of like thinking about all the information based upon only networking as performance monitoring, and the AOL of like America Online, Apple, and Oracle, or the Orion performance monitoring and the Arion performance monitoring. I mean, if it's like the Orion performance monitoring being the PM, like it's like night, I'm kind of like thinking, well, it's the AOL, the Apple and Oracle thing about Arion being Arian, or Arion and the AM thing about Tony, Orlando, and Dawn. There's dawn and there's dusk, and terminology is like sunrise and sunset, and it seemed to be something about the thing about information that has led to the idea of the Star of David and the 6-point star of like Israel. Yet the Deep Star 6 is presenting some information that might maybe be some brains about the Ocean 12 and to ocean or not to ocean. But it seemed to be, I mean, like Tony, Orlando, and the Dawn, and it seemed to be the difference between AOL being America Online, or the alignment of the wall, as compared to like Lockheed Martin's 2 arrows, 4 lines, and 3 intersecting axes at the location of federal, state, and local authorities, and that Fred Flintstone bedrock amenities like on Arrow of normally the executives are someone making some kind of grade anyway that's inside and just looking at the wall that way, and ultimately the eccentric triangles of like Lockheed Martin, if the lines were like attached to the arrows, it would look like probably a 22.5 degree of like a double forward slash. How true that is, I'm really going to have to think about it. But it's kind of like the power squared of an eccentric triangle representing the plane horizons of import and export of international financial management. Yet it presents the eccentric triangle that seemed to be the thing about television programming involving Miami Dolphins and My Friend Flicka, and the thing about Lassie, and Lassie being a collie. The thing about a collie, it seemed to be the thing about internet protocol, the call, the callie, the internet protocol, the callie of a local area network, okay? And it seemed to be, think about Lassie. And, it's a little bit of humor, but I mean, Lassie Onassis, okay? The thing about JFK and the black and white thing and the Technicolor and pastel getting into, the living color thing about television programming. And it seemed to be the thing about really even, the thing about the Miami Dolphins and the television series My Friend Flicka and Lassie, the callie about, the Atlantic side and we international like Warner, Electra, and Atlantic, presenting, the alphabetics seem to be so much about the 24 thing and the Apple iPhone SE somewhere in between the Reese's statute and the IRA seem to be presenting the scale ratio of like the double / of HTTP : and it seemed to be, the thing about, all that information, but it seemed to be, the thought that available in closed caption for the hearing impaired is something like, the national deficit. And, I mean, considering this person, okay, is okay, repeatedly, here recently I've been, thinking about it because, once again, this is like LASIK, laser corrective eye surgery, a coupon. And I believe at the location, I'm trying to remember the name. It's probably like a Queensryche song. Couldn't pronounce the name thing. But anyway, it's like Jeff or Jeffrey. And the way it's spelled with GEOFFF. It's either Jeff or Jeffrey. GEOFFRY. It's probably including the Ray thing about a laser, okay? The thing with this is that this LASIK laser corrective eye surgery is like, thing in the mailbox about, a current resident, okay? And here's the thing is that I was thinking about that because of Mercedes-Benz coming through Pearland. And likewise, the thing about every SUV for a while, new and used, was coming through Pearland with the Z71. I mean, ultimately it seemed to be, almost like the thing of Newark television programming involving, the SVU, Special Victims Unit. Although the thought of a Stargate program and certain issues and involving what seemed to be linking, some idea between like Houston and New York and alphanumerics of like, Houston being 112, New York being 111, and Los Angeles being 213. And the thing with this is like, County Road 101 is like approximately, probably within, I would say pretty close to maybe 300 feet, I'm assuming. Maybe less. I'm not sure how many feet it is, but it's only, like, it's walking distance probably, like a big block. Around, like a high rise is probably the distance. Just walking around a normal size high rise is probably about that distance on a sidewalk from my house to like County Road 101, which is considered to be Bailey Avenue. What was then, like a two-way. 2-lane is now like a 4-lane 2-way and an avenue. Not necessarily just limited to the idea of County Road 101, but the thing with it is that, that's in California as well, going through Los Angeles with the area code 213. The thing with this is that in Houston being 112 with 101, it presents the alphanumerics of like, 213, like Los Angeles or, Galveston County, or Chevrolet Silverado Z71 and the Chevrolet Camaro IROC Z28 is like 213. And the thing about the IROC Z28 is like the bank in the air. Yet at the same time, International Financial Management of Sand Software in the rectangle, like the Lincoln Continental hood ornament in the rectangle on the tennis court. It ultimately gets to Lincoln Continental representing the idea of Abraham Lincoln, Night Vision Shuttle Government Stargate Program, and it seemed to be all about Vice President networks involving, Stargate program. And something that I've been through and didn't even consider the Stargate program until I realized that, 25 or 30 year period had passed. And once again, memory became, the issue. Even more so, it seemed to be the only one that seems to like matter right now is memory minus de facto being 35, or, the I, the EYE, the 35, or, Austin Powers and Austin being the thing about being 84. And ultimately, even 3D International Chase and and Capital One out on the west side of Houston off of Loop 610 West, off of Westheimer, and Capital and Chase being side by side, and 380 International's like right at the corner of like Westheimer, right at the West Loop 610. But it seemed to be that 3D International's about that wooden buffalo nickel. Ultimately, that idea of like Trump saying fake news and the alphanumerics 84 and wooden being the word of the wooden buffalo nickel normally associated with the thought of coffee. Ultimately, VIX Formula 44 combined, what has been, like Japanese, been having 22 letters in the Japanese alphabet, being the factor of 22 applied to like, VIX Formula 44 being 66, like Route 66, and ultimately, the cover up of a top secret. And in like the Route 66 being like a bird bath, okay? And the Better Business Bureau and all the information of a Better Business Bureau bird bath baptism being like 6 and 6, being BBB and BBB being 6, and a Michael Jackson song. It's easy as 1, 2, 3, ABC, which is actually 6 as well. But all of it in pronunciation is like SIX, and like the alphanumerics of 52 and the VPN, the Vice President Network, or the option that seemed to be the issue, potentially somewhere in between like high school and like a major university. And I'm kind of like looking at this person right here, and I just like somehow in my mind just see the silence, and almost think that's like within, real close about something about silence. And the thing about a national deficit, okay, and I'm not real sure, if somewhere in the idea of a national deficit, and I'm not real sure if the thing or the difference between high school and a major university is the motivation about the complete silence, and maybe something involved in a way that I'm like kind of like recognizing in the immediate area that's really like already happening, kind of like continuation in the situation. But the thing with this is that it's kind of like I had mentioned several times about the who knows anyway for him. And it seemed to be almost like a combination of like, the idea of like Dr. Pepper being the DR of deed restrictions, or just turning the television on, or the thought of maybe an absentee voting, or carbon footprint and mechanics liens, and what the deal is about, litigation, de facto and writ habeas corpus, or somewhere between the RISA statute and the IRA, and the thing about supplemental security income being the SSI, and the misappropriation allocation of the Mississippi, ultimately getting to the biggest mouth of the river being, like an electronic schematic symbol of a triangle, ultimately, the pi squared of a 6-point star in the Israeli flag. Yet some of the information is being presented like already at World News, and it seemed to be the Tony, Orlando, and Dawn of the AM, and it seemed to be the 247 degree of the AM and PM of like 8 PM and 8 AM of the Southwest Freeway in Houston, and the United States Supreme Court Southwest Court reporter, and some information. It seemed to be including Southwest Airlines, and it seemed to be ultimately like a United States Secretary of Treasury Robert E. Rubin thing, more so of the name of an endorsement, and all the factors involved that seem to be identifying the actual participation, whether neglect based on last of experience, or being led to believe that that's all that needs to be done is it's just an endorsed check, and whether or not if a personal account should be identified as a 1099 managing every endorsed check of that particular person. In my case, the thought of a vice president network seemed to be, well, would that place a boundary and limitation really on experience of naivety, or maybe the thought of maybe the idea of like it's a known fact is a foreknowledge of performance monitoring, and all that took place. In any case, I'm kind of like thinking about this one person here in a way that since day one, it's an automatic, wow, look who's in the mailbox, and for real, and the thing with this is that I almost see something about the silence of a picture that almost seemed to be some transition in my mind of the Statue of Liberty as compared to Columbia Pictures. Something about a national deficit. I'm not real sure if that's the idea of the who knows anyway form, or what relation really has obviously been about Babylon, or the thought, I don't want to get so specific that it's an insult, but I mean, who's really trying to kid who about what an insult is not, as far as like relationship, um, involving some idea like ultimately it seemed to be like all the way to Egypt, involving the black bird, and involving Charlton Heston being Moses, and Yul Brynner is like the thing about Pharaoh, and the pagan idolatry as compared to the novice idea, or the thought of what relation would only mean, based upon wishful thinking, as some idea of like a factor that seemed to be maybe through not being totally aware of a situation or ever really mentioned, other than surveillance possibly being the only issue about it. Or the thing of it is that in any case is that it's got to the point that whether or not, if a national deficit is about some transition between all this information, even the thought of going beyond the idea of religion, or the thought of what relation is or is and has been or is and is not going to be, or the thought of some idea that has mentioned the idea of like the sign of circumcision. Okay, it's not really referring to an endorsement of an employment history, or up in the air as a surface-to-air missile. It's like I mean, do you really identify like when it's really good to see someone, and wait to a surface to air? It's like I mean, isn't everyone supposed to know? Is that really what it's meant? Is everyone's really supposed to know? Well, who's it that doesn't know? Okay. The thing with this is that really seemed to be that really ultimately that in any case that the factors that seem to be kind of suggested indirectly would be the only thought of like Babylon being 71 in Pearland, or the idea of one size fits all. Are you sure? I mean, well, anyway, so I've been thinking about something about the Statue of Liberty as compared to, Columbia Pictures presenting the similarities. The thought of maybe, I never even considered myself something of Columbia, just because I practice my drums, because I chose music as a musician and a singer. But I've referred to Columbia Pictures as impersonating the Statue of Liberty. And all these bands, I'm kind of thinking, I mean, ultimately, if it's really getting to the Statue of Liberty, and me not really realizing these bands are really involved that way, and maybe every one of them, maybe only the United States, or maybe the only thought of what the 12 voters are banks mean, or the idea maybe of it's not the category of money and above the category of every money involved, that would seem to be more so on the electronic and annuity side of degrees, that seem to be really above the idea beyond the method of banking, or the category of money, which ultimately gets to what an endorsement really has meant, or maybe led to believe that obviously it hadn't had the significance, even meet the requirements of investment terminology involving human capital, or making a grade beyond a local area network of internet protocol. And it seemed to be the only thing about Lassie being a collie, and the IP address being the internet protocol, and the only thing about a call is a colleague. A colleague? A colleague. You gotta be kidding me. An interscholastic. Scholastic. It's scholastic. It's like a drummer is. It's the last stick. Chopstick, Yeah, so anyway, okay. In any case, so it seemed to be something about the national deficit that kind of has a concern based upon the idea of a manufactured length of an erection. Okay, let's skip all the crap and get straight into the construction of anatomy as compared to the thought of a high-rise building. I mean, the idea of purgatory has never been identified as the thought of maybe a bird perching. And ultimately, terminology of a bird perching seemed to be the idea of my name, Wade, being 33, or MGM, ultimately getting to the lion and zodiac in that way of MGM and the 33 thing. That seemed to be the actual duration, I think, of the years. I think something about the Lord Jesus Christ, from, I think his lifespan was 33 years. My name, okay, is Wade, okay? Wade Servant Pretty, and I never really thought that would be really the issue of a vice president network, or the thought of my birth certificate being born Houston, Texas, would be the idea of an easement being as a vice president network as a carbon footprint, absentee voting or a mechanics leading based upon what's made as some idea of television programming based upon what participation might only reflect as, I mean, if that's the idea of a signature, you know, being in front of the, you know, television, you know, and saying, wow, it's really good seeing you. Is it really? I mean, is it the contra affair in a way? I mean, is it consensual in that way as a degree level? I mean, would that be the same sex issue? As it's like safe. It's like, wow, how about that screensaver? Wow, it's really good seeing you. So like anyway, so like in any case, so like it seemed to be really, I mean, ultimately the idea of what relation is or is not, or the thought of, I mean, anatomy in that way, and it seemed to be the idea manufactured, and you know, it seemed to be like a phenomenally like issue that's continually something subconsciously as far as like, you know, some like idea like, you know, remember the Alamo. The thing about, you know, here recently, it seemed to be the thing of whether if relation has ultimately got to the Alamo being something about alimony, or the thought of maybe, remember the Alamo. I mean, would that be the idea between a high school and a major university, and like the drum major, or some conductor, and a semiconductor and a conductor, presenting the pi r squared, that would maybe give the idea of like the national deficit as an orchestration, as compared to, you know, would involve, you know, vocals, and, you know, Sarbanes and Oxley financial instruments of SOX compliance. I mean, if the national deficit is really getting to the symphonic part about, you know, not necessarily the verbatim as a degree level, or the idea of, you know, sarcasm. I mean, somewhere in between the degree level of verbatim, it seemed to be, you know, like the perception of like not being an idiot and like really getting the point about, you know, something within description that doesn't even suggest sarcasm, and on a professional level, I mean, it's like really beyond the brains about knowing it's not sarcasm, but I mean, who's anyone trying to kid? I mean, only a total idiot would know that it's really sarcasm at a degree level. So like, you know, all that thing about relation, that's really the word in architecture, platform, embedding, and encryption, seem to be the idea, whether or not if it's ultimately originating as a religious issue, as a sign of circumcision, or some idea, you know, as a forward lateral, you know, attempting to complete a pass in relation, somewhere between, you know, like Egypt and the idea of a pagan idolatry, or, you know, all that check stuff, you know, information that presents, you know, some idea like, you know, you got to be kidding me. Well, obviously you're not. Okay, the thing with this is that, and ultimately, the whole entire point is Babylon being the idea of relation, or the thought that really, I mean, it's gotten to the point that really, I mean, is it that you're just waiting for me to say something about, you know, anatomy, as compared to maybe OSHA, and all this stuff about, you know, frequency in Latin terminology. Okay, it seemed to be the deal about the frequency above the letter N in Latin terminology, and it seems to be the only thing about that being above the N as one cycle of frequency that normally has a center line of like oscillation, and at a 90 degree, it's like a circle with a dot in it. And the thing about it is that it represents the idea of the euro dollar in a sense in center point energy, and ultimately, you know, the Roosevelt New Deal Act, that seemed to be an intellectual duration of the real information involving international electronic engineering and OPEC. And the thing about, you know, we international and Electra, in the way of the international electronic engineering and OPEC, simulated the thing about the ocean. The thing with this is that ultimately, it seemed to be the bird seemed to be the thing about perching, a bird perching. In translation, it's kind of like the ing being like the in progress ing. It's like in progress, you know, it's happening, and a bird perching, and then it's like it's segregated, and not the ing, it's like pronounced purge. And then it's like a transition, and the book Six is the temple of the history of the U.S. dollar in Latin America as the Mammon issue, and color-coded between Latin and like the Persian Gulf, And it's ultimately getting to the bird factor involving constitutional law and state statutes annotated, and some idea of Deep Star 6, identifying two triangles that are Delta Force, seem to be Barack Obama's, reference as Al-Qaeda of the Persian Gulf, yet, the book Secrets of the Temple, How the Federal Reserve Runs the Country, as Latin America, and a practical application that seemed to be, the Pulse Club in Florida, and somewhere in my mind seemed to be the Tony, Orlando, and Don, somewhere in the Houston area, knowing that Southwestern Bell is Southwestern Bell, and Bluebell Ice Cream, off of 290 in Brenham, but it seemed to be that the blue public phone, being Southwestern Bell, it had been removed beginning in 1990. Even before they were being removed, 1990 is when, it was going to happen. And started, all the phones were, public phones that were blue were being removed around the entire Houston area, as far as I know, the entire state of Texas, if not the entire continent. And we're only, being found like inside, going through the sheriff's department into a governmental structure. How true that is now, I'm not sure, but I know that all the blue phones that were inside of the sheriff's going through into a governmental structure, or federal, state, local authorities, is some idea, as some idea of modification between county and state at a federal level, as like a federal detention center, or the structure that seems to present armed forces in a way as the sheriff, yet it seems to be that a combine of federal, state, local authorities of detention centers seems to be the DC thing more so, really beyond the District of Columbia in my mind, but the DC of like direct circuitry and dimensional clause of the structure, and the ARO thing about, the HTTP calling the asymmetrical design on ARO, and it really gets to the Lockheed Martin thing about it, and the alignments on the wall based upon, the shelf on the exact opposite side of the wall that has the two triangles on either side up under it. And, that being an electronic schematic of like the triangle being the biggest mouth of the river being the delta, but it identifies the delta force. It seemed to be, referenced as Barack Obama's statements involving him referring to Al-Qaeda, the Persian Gulf, and not at the same time, I think it was maybe at the same time later on, but giving the impression, not really relating the connectivity of his phrase, saying that he's trying to demonize you, okay? But in the book Secrets of the Temple, How the Federal Reserve Runs the Country, the thing about the mammon, identifying the history of the U.S. dollar below the equator in the book Secrets of the Temple, How the Federal Reserve Runs the Country, originate, supposedly before, 1914, but I've seen the Federal Reserve Banks being identified as both 1913 and 1914 as the beginning of the 12 Federal Reserve Banks. I've seen it both ways. It's not really taught that way, but it really is that way. I've seen it being 1913 and 1914, that the Jehovah's Witnesses proclaim and teach that the beginning of the last days is 1914. Jehovah's Witnesses do not teach it as one of the openings suggested as the 12 Federal Reserve Banks. It doesn't suggest Deep Star 6, maybe the thought of maybe not necessarily the religious issue of the 6-point star of the Star of David is an Israeli flag. Jehovah's Witnesses teaches that 1914 is the beginning of the last days, and that is one of the days of the 12 Federal Reserve's supposedly grand opening, but I've seen it as 1913 and 1914, which is really the issue of M is N. The M is N being 56 is 10, ultimately, a practical application of M being 13 and is being 28, the IS, and 13 is 14, and M is N is like 19, 13, and 14 of the 12 Federal Reserve Banks that the Jehovah's Witnesses teaches to be 1914, but I've seen information directly from sources, claiming to be sources of the 12 Federal Reserve Banks, identifying what seemed to be a Sacramento issue, somewhere between a frozen Neanderthal, Paleolithic, Anglo-Saxon, and Sacramento, and the humor about, like a stationary engineer on a toilet riding a Roman chariot in Nagasaki. It's really the thing about Sacramento. And, the idea of going through a Stargate program seemed to be something about really what is taught as as I'm not sure if it's considered world history. I'm actually trying to remember the categorization about a frozen Neanderthal, Paleolithic, Anglo-Saxon. And it seemed to be, I'm not sure if it was social studies or world history, but it's in there, and I'm trying to actually remember what grade it was, but it seemed to have the significance going through the Stargate program about some, real brains about frozen Neanderthal, Paleolithic, Anglo-Saxon. And the humor, it seemed to be like a stationary engineer sitting on a toilet riding a Roman chariot in Nagasaki, really being Sacramento. In any case, so like it seemed to be like getting to that information because, I'm trying to think about, finishing up where I actually started, and I had to stop because I run out of gas. And I'm running on a generator. And the lighting that you're seeing me on is what you see like on me, with me on my drum set on my channel, WadeASVPriddy, P-R-D-D-Y, playing my drums, Pro Vision VSX, double bass, 35, total of 35 pieces, including hardware, special effects percussion, 3 rotos, 4 octobans, and double bass, a total like 15 drums total, and like I think I have 8 or 9 cymbals. Wow, yeah. So like it's either 8 or 9 cymbals, okay. If I want to include both top and bottom of the hi-hat, I think is all it is. But anyway, yeah. So like all that's going on, and I'm getting straight up blue now. But anyway, I was talking about this because I'm thinking about this one particular person, and the idea of a coupon being God's angel, and a current resident, and the thing about something about in my mind the Statue of Liberty. It's kind of like I listen to myself all the time when I like make videos here recently, and previously I wasn't even going to talk about like any of this. I would have been like doing my own original music, and probably doing my thing about YouTube, using YouTube as a music video portfolio of my preference and range, but all kinds of issues with air quality and other factors were like coming into play and really affecting the entire situation, and got really beyond not cool. But anyway, so here's the thing about it, is that this one particular person in my mind is like something about, I'm not sure what to think, or even if I should say anything really what I really think about a national deficit. Because I've mentioned, the idea of the who knows anyway form. And, the thing of it is that, considering certain thing about anatomy, or the thought of relation, or a manufactured thought of what only, I mean, for real, like an erection of a high-rise as compared to, some skeletal structure involving anatomy, or what relation really, I mean, one size fits all, are you sure? Wow. I guess I'll know when I know, huh? The thing with this is that really getting to the point is that really, that being 71 in Pearland and Babylon, and ultimately the idea of not anything about the sign of circumcision, although it is the alphanumeric of 206, it's not normally identified whether if neglect based upon lack of experiences, the accusation of a defector seeking amnesty, maybe not knowing that maybe they should, maybe identify a personal account that as of employment, of a bunch of employment checks that had been endorsed by an employee, placing in their own personal account, and maybe it should have been maybe the idea of a 1099, not necessarily a sole proprietorship in the way of a condemning issue that would maybe be the real truth about maybe Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, being the idea of a baptismal booth, would seem to be maybe a requirement between the Persian Gulf and Latin America. Something about, maybe the idea of something what had really taken place about identifying what seemed to be, the idea of some idea of the information that Barack Obama presented as Al-Qaeda owning their own telecommunications entire system and network. Yet he refers to the information Al-Qaeda, in my mind, of the misappropriation allocation, the word being allocation, the misappropriation allocation of the Mississippi, seemed to be that allocation becoming allocate, and then occasion, then ocean, and the ocean to ocean or not to ocean. It really seemed to be the thing about the Israeli flag and the Star of David as a 6-point star or telepathic angel as compared to the Deep Star 6. And it seemed to be something about Highway 59 being the alphanumeric 140 in Pearland, Texas, yet 59 on the west side of Houston. It seemed to be the United States Supreme Court Southwest Court Reporter, which is predominantly, the books that I really really focused on and really got into the thing about de facto. I mean, that one word was like my whole entire point about reading the United States Supreme Court Southwest Court Reporter. For like really every reason, the Houston area, the Code Blue thing about the Houston Police Department, the Code Blue, even Bluebell ice cream. And the thing about, even HPD of Houston Police Department being, like the HPD of Hawaiian Police Department, and, television programming, which seemed to be a thing about, that television series, of Hawaii Five-0 being like an Alvin. Something about the bookstore and the student lounge, when I was there anyway. I was kind of like noticing that, when I was in there, it's kind of like, hey. But anyway, it's something about, I'm thinking about the national deficit because I'm kind of like thinking about, is it the thing to say about a national deficit, or is it like really the issue of a demanded standard of like telepathic communication are available in closed captioning for the hearing impaired based upon teleprompting? And, the concern is considering like a lot like that had happened going through the Stargate program, was really 25 to 30 years not even considering it a Stargate program, although, I've seen people, like involved with like television motion picture, and even the transition, which seemed to be, the transition to black and white, looking like they hadn't even aged a day, me being like in diapers, and, getting out of diapers, even at the age of like, between like, from like 1 to 5 years of age, watching television and seeing that transition from black and white to like, the pastel colors of Technicolor, and to the, the color, and realizing that some of the soldiers in like would be represented in the sheriff's uniform, or some idea of selective service, or all the stars in the way of like uniform as compared to the thought of maybe the idea of an eternal treasury, and some of the soldiers that were like in uniform was kind of like I remember seeing them in diapers, and I mean like several of them looked like they hadn't even aged a day, walking me through certain parts about it, okay. And I was kind of like flipping in my mind, it's kind of like, wow, I think really hadn't aged a day, and it's like, 25, 30 years later, it's kind of like, I was kind of like, I'm the one aging. It's like I'm looking at a person been on television and looking the same, and hadn't looked like they hadn't aged like not one day, looking the same age when I was in diapers as compared to going through a circuit. For real, yeah. So like something about that as well. But anyway, yeah. So like I was thinking about that, about a national deficit in some kind of way that seemed to be, whether or not it's available in closed captioning for the impaired, or the who knows anyway form, it seemed to be really the issue of what appreciation is or is not, as compared to the idea, the difference between what seemed to be Columbia Pictures and District of Columbia being the issue of Internet Protocol of local area network. It seemed to be the idea, me going through a circuit and being a drummer, automatically, thinking the Statue of Liberty, and the thing of the difference between Columbia and like the Statue of Liberty presents, the Statue of Liberty, but it seemed to be the Swiss Klondike bar and the hockey puck that's somewhere in between, like my whole goal in my golden life, The thing with this is that really that there's somewhere in my mind, the deformation. You've heard of tax reform. The thing about deformity or anatomy, I'm kind of like really trying to be really cautious about mentioning anything in a way, because it seemed to be, certain factors had taken place, okay? Me being gassed while I was sleeping, actually realizing that I'd been operated on, didn't even know it, okay, is a thing. And I'm really thinking about something other than myself at this particular point, the right here, right now thing about potentially a perception that I'm not even going to question or attempt anything other than, maybe mentioning a little bit about maybe something that really shouldn't be a concern, but it seemed to be like really, but even acknowledging it seemed to be potentially not like cool at all, but here it is anyway, okay? The thing with this is that, that it's actually taking place while I was going through the circuit, and like 4 inches of my humerus bone on both sides were like actually removed. I didn't even know that I'd been operated on. I mean, obviously it was done with a laser. I mean, I had surgery before involving like a laser. I mean, it does not leave a scar, and heals tremendously. I mean, so very much way faster. It's unreal as compared to like a scalpel, a knife, and stitches, a laser being used in, like dermatology. I mean, it heals so much faster. I mean, it just doesn't leave a scar. I did not know that I'd even been operated on, although I knew it was laying from side to side, just to, sit on a toilet, and take care of it, some, teleprompting, toiletry, and, so like, I mean, I was noticing, even the idea, that's not my idea of humor, although it's the humorous bone. It seemed to be the idea of like, even, the idea of like, GMC raising the bar is kind of like, wow, I guess I know when I really have eyeballs exceeding above my beltway. I guess I know when I know. And it seemed to be, I mean, really, it's kind of like, wow, I guess the waiting's the hardest part, but, hey, it's really good seeing you anyway, right? So like GMC's racing bar, and wow, I guess I know when I know, right? But it seemed to be the idea of going beyond the neighborhood. And everything that truly seemed to be really the factor of whether or not the national deficit is the only idea of, certain factors that really I've experienced, or, I don't even like saying being used that way. It's not that I chose, like, really quite a bit about it. It's just that the thing of it is before I even considered the Stargate program, I mean, I always tried to make the best of my situation, which involved, really me just like thoroughly like impressed and fascinated, which seemed to be about alphanumerics, specifically, before I even really got serious about applying linguistics and the study of language combined symbolically and analytically and alphanumerically. And, the real deal about, it seemed to be the three of like power squared, E equal MC squared, and exponential quotients of power multiplication. And the difference between on the backside of the US $1 bill, it's like it's there, and when it's found, I mean, it looks like the idea that it's invisible, you can't see it, it's not there. But it is based upon, some real brains about it. And it's not that it's anything other than, potentially like the idea of a national deficit of like already knowing at a degree level that, well, this is what I have to say about it. And I'm kind of want to be cautious because, certain things that I've really already experienced, and I don't want to be affected in a way, in a way that might really be the issue like right now about something else other than myself. The thing with this is that really I had to refer to like quite a bit about, who knows anyway for him. And it seemed to be like whether or not, if it's going to be the idea of appreciation or depreciation, if it's only real estate, or if human capital has really only been the only idea of terminology, of investment terminology, identifying, some idea of itemization going beyond the method of banking. Yet a religious issue seemed to be involving purgatory. Yet a boycott and embargo presents the same idea as waiting, yet a method of banking, holding, and all these factors that seem to ultimately involve a bird perching and purging. And it's like the bird bat baptism of terminology in the courtroom, and a transition really between like Latin America and the Persian Gulf that's identified really in my mind as like the thought of Deep Star 6, or the thought of, some idea of reference that identify a color code between, constitutional law and state statutes annotating that one word repudiation. It really doesn't seem to be necessarily the word at times, but it seemed to be the one word of warehousing that connect warehousing and real estate of state statutes annotation involving television programming in the book and the law library of jurisprudence with the black back. I mean, it seemed to be the thing about the golf course, the Putt-Putt golf course, and even more so in my mind, it seemed to be so much that one song of Atlanta Miles, Black Velvet. I mean, it seemed to be, so the book of jurisprudence and the black velvet being the black back on, the pastel green of the color of the book cover. Yeah, like on par with the Putt-Putt grass and the Bermuda grass, and it being the velvet of the black velvet in jurisprudence on par. It's like, golf courses are some of the most beautiful landscaping, on the planet. For real, it's like phenomenal. It, in that way, the landscaping of a golf course, it's just like, awesomely beautiful. And as far as the way I think about it, anyway, the thing with this is that, that one song is I thought about jurisprudence that way. Even before I remembered the song, I'd heard it many a time, but I listen to it even more now to see if I hear anything like anything even newer than my own perception There seemed to be the thought of how annotated adoption and abortion seemed to be the Roe v. Wade thing, only whether or not if the Roe is spelled with a W, and the significance of Sigma Alpha Delta Kappa Phi, the 23 English alphabetical letters of the acronyms, and there's 4 sets of 5, and then 1 3-letter acronym totaling 23 letters. And it seemed to be the thing, really about what I'm talking about. And it seemed to be the whole idea of like identifying what seemed to be between the Persian Gulf and Al Qaeda. And to me, it's just like the letter N in Latin terminology with one cycle above it, really being at a 90 degree with a center line of oscillation like a circle with a dot or a pylon or a cone, or even a 7-point crown of the Statue of Liberty, and the 7 layers of the atmosphere, and like the 7 nations and 7 monies of Europe. I've seen information, it's almost like the difference between like a local area network, a wide area network, and a World Wide Web. And it's kind of like, internet protocol of a local area network has become the idea of whether or not if lastly, it's the only idea of a collie and, a Chevrolet Corvette and the veterinarian and Aryan Sky and the Vatin. Here's the thing about a canine unit, it's like it's identified like quite a bit about, involving police and its television programming. And the thing about a neighborhood is really the television, like in every home, in every neighborhood. Okay, in the Houston area, it's like K television, okay? And really W television, likewise, it's really, how could it not be, both? And it's just like, some idea of like, it's a secret, It's like the PG-13 rating. It's kind of like, the PG-13 being spelled out. It's like the alphanumerics of 99 and telepathic. It's almost like the national deficit of subconsciousness minus shades being 181. Houston, Texas, electronic power, we international and selective service. It's kind of like, PG-13 is like the PG is like 23, like Sigma, Alpha, Delta, Kappa, Phi being the 23 English alphabetical letters as acronyms. Yet the highest levels seem to involve, some of the stuff about attenuation, which is the alphanumerics 140, and attenuation USA is 181. Houston, Texas, electronic power, we international and selective service. And here's the thing about the eagle with the banner with E pluribus UNUM, is that from Los Angeles, the University of Miami, it's like the E pluribus, UN being Los Angeles, and the UN being the University of Miami, yet the color codes of like Orange County and Los Angeles area and UCLA, and the information in Los Angeles area presents the linguistic alphanumerics. And I'll have to think about the American Legion baseball, being the AL and the LA, and the initials of American Legion being ultimately, LA and Los Angeles and linguistic alphanumerics. I'll actually have to think about, the baseball, while I was like in high school, and it was normally referred to as summer baseball, but it's American Legion and not really high school, but it was like on the high school field anyway, here in Pearland. But anyway, I want to think about that as far as maybe information that might maybe provide some idea about pledging allegiance to the flags. Like what flag? The vice president network flag, which seemed to be involving like every categorization of money on the planet, or the idea of maybe identifying human capital beyond the method of banking as an endorsement in the name of a current event, a current affair, or maybe increase the potential of maybe the ERISA statute as maybe a defector seeking amnesty having the right to assemble like a default student loan to pool and ocean or not to ocean, the idea of like every, defector seeking amnesty that only endorse their checks and didn't identify their earned employment checks, placing it into a personal account as a 1099, managing their own idea of not necessarily a religious issue of, soul food representing some idea, or, some idea of like selling their soul for rock and roll. You gotta be kidding me, man. Selling your soul for rock and roll? You gotta be kidding me. What is that supposed to mean? You got your rectangles on the tennis court with like Abraham Lincoln, the only president studied in the dark and has the hood ornament, for, the accuracy of penmanship and nanoluminous and measuring the density and like, you know, all that good stuff, and the infrared and infrared green, and what seemed to be now the iron ore. It's not really gravel, but it's been used as gravel, and it seemed to be almost like the deal about the burnt orange in the University of Texas having that color, yet it's almost pastel as night vision. I don't know if it's really even considered a pastel, but it is that color in night vision that really looks like a pastel as night vision. You know, like at night, like night vision. I mean, it looks like a pastel. The color itself, like on clothes, I'm not sure if it's even a pastel or not, but when it's actually like measuring like density as luminance as night vision, I mean, it looks like a pastel, like the infrared and infrared green. And the thing about the 13-band graphic equalizer is really the thing about, you know, the pastel green being the ambience of the 13-band graphic equalizer, and the pastel red being, you know, the infrared of like night vision of a 13-band graphic equalizer. Those are the only two colors that identify the 13 thing about, you know, frequency. The thing about waveform as compared to a graphic equalizer is that, you know, changing the speed of processing a frequency only changes the pitch and tone, but with waveform it doesn't change the pitch or tone. The speed of processing might speed up, but it doesn't change the waveform. It maintains its, you know, integrity to itself. As compared to a frequency, it becomes like a flat line the faster it's like going. And something about, you know, the heart monitor and the Pulse Club, I was thinking about it earlier. I'm going to have to think about it again. But it seemed to be the factor of like, I'm actually trying to stay calm about maybe a national deficit, because I'm thinking about the Statue of Liberty and something about, you know, what I'm looking at. And something about really that's like been in this tent back during the Stargate program. This lining was actually white, and it was in my home. I didn't even like, once again, I mean, even this tent, the furniture, and the drum set was eventually in my home, and I'm not sure, you know, how long I was in my own home. I didn't even know I was in my own home, okay? And even this tent, I mean, I'm sure that it seemed to be probably so practiced as a standard that, you know, going from room to room trying to avoid, you know, toxins and contaminants on my bed, in my closet, and on my clothes, on my music equipment, the music equipment being switched, and ultimately realizing that my home theater, likewise, and it seemed to be, you know, even a statement of some idea of a freaking podcast happening like when I go grocery shopping, and some idea of like the Who Knows Anyway forum, or some Alpha American 71 being like, you know, CIA angels, or the way it's spelled as a DEAMONS, demons issue, or, you know, some idea of, you know, the hard God, or, you know, the 52 thing of Pearl, or some ungodly explanation to geographics involving the devil, or being plural in like 52 and 19 being 71 in Pearland. Okay. And all that happening, and some idea of a key in my musical instruments. I'm getting equipment for like a recording studio, and realizing that someone has had access to virtually every key on the entire planet, even more so of like Amazon and local stores in the Pearland area. It's like so far beyond like not cool to me. It's not that I have to like anything about it, and when I do, I guess I'll know. Okay, I mean, I'm supposed to know what I like, okay? So, I mean, maybe that might be a good idea, at least for me anyway. It's not like that it's an economic plea bargain, Ponzi scheming, raffling voucher, auctioneering clearance, and warehousing. Or some idea identifying the 240% in the pawn shop as a commercial venue of living quarters. The only factors seem to be, I'm not sure if it's limited to appliances, but it is the 240 volts, yet the 24 of the IEEE and the big O of the International Electronic Engineering Organization, and the O being a 0, and the IEEE being 24, and the O being a 0 being 240, and a commercial venue of living quarters, and all that, you know, analytical, symbolic, and alphanumeric, linguistic, and all that combined about, you know, analytical reasoning, and all that pi r squared, E equal MC squared, and exponential quotients, and reading Japanese from top to bottom, and like like watching audio streaming with signal strength and quality and tonal variations, and the signal strength, and identifying it like streaming like quantum, like reading Japanese from top to bottom as audio, of an MP3 format. Anyway, so it's already going on like an hour and 10 minutes, like right on it. Anyway, I want to include that because, I've been thinking quite a bit about, and it's true as it gets, something about, the similarities of something in this tent during, and okay, that's like 1994, 95, and 96, and I'm not sure to the extent of how long I was actually in my own home, and I didn't even realize it was my own home. It's how intense the air quality was while I was asleep. But, I eventually was in this tent, and after, 15, 20 years later, I bought the same drum set, the same furniture, and ultimately, all the stuff going on with contaminants and all that stuff about, air quality, even toxicology. It got so far beyond cool about, having to wear, surgical mask, even, even a respirator for a while, okay? As, so like it's like already like not cool going through a circuit and realizing that air raids were taking place and I'd been operated on, and it seemed to be a forecast of 4 inches of my humerus bone at the age. It seemed to be the 1992 of a baptism and other factors. It seemed to be a complete turning point of baptism of the Mormon Church, and all certain issues happening that led to a demanded requirement of participating, going through like a 10-year circuit that had gone on really beyond 15 years. Really seemingly based upon my memory and realizing some of the before and after of what was the intense part of during going through the circuit was the realization that the thoughts that were like vague back then are like the reality of knowing the intensity of going through it. It was really the vagueness of then. What was the intensity going through it during the circuit of predominantly the hardest of 1994, 95, and 96, and maybe a little bit of 97, but the air raids inside and realizing that 4 inches of my humerus bone on both sides of my arms had been removed and I had been operated on. And all the stuff about, length about an erection ultimately seemed to be getting to a Star is Born, and that letter N in Latin American terminology applied to the acronym OSHA of Occupational Safety and Health Administration, which seemed to be the issue of the apprentice of building and constructing like a high-rise at First City National Bank, not limited to, but involving commercial venue as well. And ultimately, for real, it seemed to be, certain factors that led to like even, the idea of a test that was like, of the electrical apprenticeship. But the test was like from Washington, D.C., and it was like, far beyond even the idea of a curriculum normally of a journeyman that's like graduated as a journeyman through an apprenticeship is normally at a bachelor degree level based upon the direction of the academics involved with it. This one particular test that was at an apprenticeship school for an electrician apprenticeship was like far beyond, any journeyman, probably even a master's academically in the classroom probably wouldn't even know what to do on site for the first time, being a degree genius and not having the experience of actually knowing how to use it. And that's the case so many times with like, not limited to the non-degreed all the time, it seemed to be, but even, certain degrees of people who get degrees not knowing how to get it, having the right to assemble and getting it and like a graduating class. And it's not always limited to just one specific location as a graduating class. And getting, the idea of like television and networking and involved and knowing that from the very beginning is really so much the issue about degrees, already knowing when and where to go upon some idea of graduation, having, the idea of the right to assemble as a network, maybe more so on a national level as compared to a remote idea of like a internet protocol of a local area network, or even that much at a local area network. But it seemed to be the IP address, internet protocol, being the idea of Lassie, the internet protocol, the Kali, the internet protocol, the Kali, The colleague, oh my God, it's the G in the B in venue, isn't it? The colleague. The G in the B in venue seem to be the thing about human capital being beyond the thought of, like, the host and the Holy Ghost, and like, I mean a baptism, I mean so for real. And the B in venue seemed to be the idea of, like, being itemized, going beyond the thought of the Bluebird bus and placed on an Airbus H160. And I'm assuming that's how I got to Geneva, Switzerland. It was taken to that location. And I mean, I didn't even remember so very much about it for a 25 to 30 year period. Excuse me, but when I realized, I saw that rectangle is the deal. And in certain buildings, in LASIK laser corrective eye surgery, the location on the west side of Houston is the thing. And automatically, this is something in my mind automatically of Van Halen and Sammy Hagar, the song, Black and Blue, and the thing about, hey, Dallas, Texas, but, Faces International Days in Dallas is kind of like, really kind of like my automatic thought right here, as well as LASIK laser corrective eye surgery on the west side. But I was taken to that building of LASIK laser corrective eye surgery. In the beginning, I knew that building was there, okay? I was going out to the Art Institute of Houston, right next to Marathon Oil, and there's a sidewalk in between, approximately, probably maybe not even 30 feet in between, and Data Foundry being the thing about it up in there. I think it's still there in the same building. Marathon, I'm not sure where they went to, but it was identified as the Marathon Oil Tower of Power. I think Data Foundry is still there. In any case, that's like a big deal in networking. In any case, so like, I was taking that building of LASIK laser corrective eye surgery, and the word plaza was on it, okay? It's like 56, okay? Like light, Latin, the question, why, W-H-Y, even Y2K technology, it ultimately gets to the thought of 56 is 10 in Papermate, ultimately 94 in Roe v. Wade. But the thing about the W and the way Roe is spelled, as compared to it's showing, it's on the news, and it equates to itself. It's almost like the pi r squared. The formula is there, and there's more to it, and that there's going to be an answer. It's like, watching all that information about Roe v. Wade, Roe being spelled R-O-E, but it's on the news, and it's the only issue of a W, and it's still the same pronunciation with the W, but the alphanumerics changed from 38 of R-O-E to 61 being R-O-W-E, 61 a miracle in the news, which is really where virtually everyone sees it anyway. And it's like the pi r squared and E equal MC squared. I mean, like, do you see it? You're looking right at it. And that's so true about linguistic and alphanumerics. So very many times when realizing that, I'm sure a lot of people that like study analytically and symbolically and linguistically and alphanumerically with all that combined, it's like I'm looking at it and realizing something new after maybe 10 or 15 years, even 20, 30 years of looking at it and thinking that I know it, and that there's not any need for anything else other than knowing that a dictionary has all those other definitions of intended use. It's just that I'm not the one using those intended directions of a dictionary. It's just that I've chosen it to mean what I want it to mean. And it's like all that other became insignificant as absolutely not the issue, when in fact it really had been. So like, anyway, it's already going on like an hour and 18 minutes. But anyway, I want to include that, okay? But anyway, yeah, so like I'm trying to keep it close to an hour. I don't want to just go on and on and on and on. I think I'm going to try and, limit it to at least, an hour. But it's already going an hour and 18 minutes and like 50 seconds. So, you know what? I'm going to take a break, okay? There it is, okay?